Thank you, Carrie. First, let me tell you how pleased I am to be here with you today to talk, according to the program, about the education of teachers. And next, let me tell you that what I'm going to say might better be titled the miseducation of teachers, because my thesis is that the main thing that is wrong with the education of the young in this country today, and it would be hard to find anyone who doesn't think there's something wrong, could best be solved not through more spending, not through restructuring, but through better preparing our teachers for the job they do. Children are inspired to learn by good teachers, people who know something well, believe in its value, and enjoy introducing it to others. Teaching is an activity that can be successfully conducted in a basement room with meager furnishings. About all that is required are books and reading materials. The rest is trimming. Stripped down to essentials, when we talk about the success or failure of the schools, what we are talking about is the success or failure of teachers, not districts or boards or commissions, despite the influence they can exert, and not computers, calculators, and audiovisual equipment, although these things are nice. We're talking about the age-old process by which someone who is grown up, experienced, and educated imparts knowledge to the young. Skills and facts, how to use them, what to make of them, eventually wisdom. A familiarity with the world, past and present, and a sense of one's own place in it. That is what we mean by education, and if too many of our young are not being educated, perhaps we should take a look at those who are teaching them and ask what is going wrong and why. It may not be the teacher's fault, but it is in the teacher's role that the center must be established and must hold. Let me say a word about what I think has gone wrong in our nation's schools, how I think it has come about, and what I think we could do about it. The public schools, once this country's crucible for citizenship as well as individual achievement, have in recent years undergone a vast redefinition of their mission. The function of the schools is no longer perceived as the transmission of the common culture and the acquisition of those skills necessary to understand it, participate in it, and extend it. Instead, the schools have been transformed into agencies of social change, their primary goal, the attainment of equity at all costs, and their emphasis, consequently, on the therapeutic and the remedial in place of the quest for knowledge and excellence. How has this come about? The answer is twofold and has to do with the politicization of the schools in general and of teacher education in particular. In what amounts to a national obsession with the schools as laboratories for change, the places in which to solve all of the country's social and economic problems, schooling has become a huge industry funded by the national government as well as the states. The enormously increased role of the federal government in education, both financial and regulatory, with the legislature and the courts having more to say about what goes on in the schools in the past 30 years or so than in the entire previous history of the country, is one factor. Its corollary is the increasing power and influence of special interest groups, each pressing for its own agenda. Curricula based on multiculturalism, on self-esteem, on bilingualism, for example, are put in place presumably to serve the interests of a constituency there is reason to believe does not really benefit from such programs in the long run. The benefits flow, and flow they do, to the bureaucracies that come into being to administer these programs once they are established. It is their interests, and not necessarily the educational interests of the children in our schools, that these programs serve. The current vogue of multiculturalism is often a thinly veiled attempt to do away with the study of the Western tradition that has been the source of our political and cultural institutions on the basis of the accusation that it is a Eurocentric product of dead white males bent on exploiting the rest of the world. Knowledge of the people and events that have shaped our culture, its literature, drama, history, biography, poetry, mathematics, religious thought, scientific method, and technological achievements, all but absent in teacher education in America today. It prepares managers, not teachers, and it has little to do with education in the traditional sense. The fact is that ideas matter, that some cultures and some institutions have contributed more to human happiness and human achievement than others, that the history, literature, and science of Western civilization are our patrimony, and that our aim should be to make them understood and shared by all our citizens. It is not racist to suggest that for the black child living in America today, the institutions and arts that evolved from Greco-Roman strands via English and European adaptations to the country and the culture we share today is just as relevant as for the white child. It makes no more sense for a common school curriculum to be based on elements from an African past than a Polish one or a Korean one. Those are private endeavors to be left to the home, the family. If it isn't there, why invent it? A repressive society is one that forbids such expressions of ethnicity. A foolish society is one that substitutes them for the culture to which it should invite every citizen to partake. It is neither racist nor snobbish to invite everyone who lives in this country to feel part of a common culture as long as all citizens remain free to add to it spontaneously whatever they preserve of other cultural memories have brought with them from other times and places. But that is an individual endeavor, not the responsibility of society as a whole. That responsibility is to the heritage of Western civilization, to the democratic form of government which we enjoy and which, imperfect as it is the best thing men have devised as a way of living together. Any doubts on that score are easily dispelled by the persistent desire of people from all over the world to leave wherever they are and come here, and by the extent of the political changes wrought peacefully in this country in the consistent direction of inclusivity over the past half-century. That culture, that heritage, is where we all come from in terms of what has shaped the institutions we value and think are worth preserving, something we cannot do unless we understand and appreciate them and teach our children, all of our children, to know and value them. It is in this context that it has meaning to read in the long line of memorable documents from the Magna Carta to the Federalist Papers to understand ourselves as a nation. An African-American curriculum is fine if you are going to live in Africa. It is fine as a privately sponsored enterprise reflecting a community's ethnic pride. It makes no sense at all in the public schools of this country any more than a Jewish American curriculum, a Spanish American curriculum, or a Chinese American curriculum. These are not the cultures that shaped the institutions that define us as Americans. They all belong in a general overview of our common history and what has influenced and shaped our present state. But if we fragment our sense of nationhood and become a balkanized collection of special interest groups, something unique in historical experience will have been lost. The currently fashionable emphasis on self-esteem assumes that children can learn only from others like themselves, and that they require role models who share their skin color or ethnic background rather than any particular traits of character or knowledge. Pupils will feel good about themselves, this theory goes, if we keep telling them they're doing fine and passing them on to the next grade. Never mind that they are robbed of the sense of accomplishment that comes from real achievement. No one must fail, and if students are failing the test, change the test. The self-esteem philosophy invades every aspect of teaching these days. Feeling good about oneself is supposed to be the basis for any kind of achievement. If you think of yourself as successful, goes this argument, your chances of success are increased. Elementary school teachers are taught to concern themselves with children's feelings of self-worth and not with the worth of hard work or of realistically measured accomplishment. And so they do little to help children bring their immediate impulses under control in order to achieve long-range goals that require sustained effort. They don't teach them that real self-respect comes from real achievement, that it is earned by hard work. Who can really respect himself who has not respected something else first, enough to learn to do it well? If no one is criticized, if no one can fail, what does success mean? The worst thing about these well-intentioned attempts to teach something that cannot be taught is that it cheats the very students it is meant to help of the very thing they need the most, discipline. The children who come to school without the habits that enable them to focus their attention and master symbolic skills and abstract relationships need to be given that equipment for later success. To pass them through a series of classrooms without it is to ensure that they will feel bad about themselves when they emerge into the real world. And it is still possible to argue that there are things better to esteem than oneself. As for the demand that children be taught in the language of the countries their parents left in order to come to this one, a Hispanic father in California summed it up this way: "The schools are teaching my children in Spanish, which prepares them to be busboys. I want them to learn English so they can be lawyers." Our schools today seem to exist not so much to teach anything considered of particular value in itself, so much as to achieve the aim of educating everyone alike. In this social engineering scheme, equality of opportunity has been replaced by equality of outcome, the mandate that everyone should come out equal at the end. Well, perhaps not quite. Some, to drag out that Orwellian warhorse again, feel entitled to be more equal than others, a claim they justify on the grounds of past group suffering. A nationwide contest seems to be underway to determine who among us can claim to have been most victimized and award prizes accordingly. For some, this means, in the words of one young man recently graduated from a prestigious Eastern college, quote, "putting into place the black agenda," unquote. Or, as the tenured director of curriculum studies at a Midwestern university's School of Education, White, put it, quote, "curriculum is not about content, it's about empowerment." What she means is that it doesn't matter what you teach. What matters is whose interests are being forwarded. The educational endeavor has not only been politicized, in the process it has been reoriented toward what might be called the psychopathology of education. Since everyone must receive the same education in the same classroom at the same time, a requirement imposed by the interpretation of legislation on special education and known as mainstreaming, the education culture has become increasingly dominated by learning pathologies and the methods appropriate to the student with learning difficulties, what might be called educational therapy. Given all of these trends and the necessity of providing solutions to the problems they create, it is no wonder that teacher preparation programs have developed an overwhelming emphasis on techniques, models, methods, instructional strategies, everything but knowledge itself. And no wonder that they turn out men and women who know a lot about how to teach, but have little or nothing on which to exercise that expertise. They have spent years learning about pedagogy, but have not spent much time learning about history, language, literature, the sciences, mathematics, music, or the arts, only about how to teach them. While the larger political climate that dictates what we ask of our schools is partly to blame for this state of affairs in the institutions that prepare men and women to teach in them, it is not the whole story. There is also the matter of the politics of the teacher training establishment itself. There are approximately 1,300 institutions, from small private colleges to large state universities, involved in training teachers in this country, including some 150 graduate schools of education. The most prestigious of these are largely concerned with academic status within the university setting, competing for funds with the professional schools of law and medicine, and producing enormous amounts of research, much of it trivial, with much faculty time and energy going into writing grant proposals and designing learning models. Little of this is of much help to the classroom teacher. The elite research universities study education. They do not train people to practice it. They are not oriented toward the goals of credentialing or licensing. They leave that to the big state schools, which, for better or worse, are necessarily more responsive to the community through the pressures of the legislature. The graduate school of education has actually become the way out of the classroom to gain professional advancement in school administration, research, academia, foundations. Everything but taking orders from district school boards about how to teach fourth graders. The faculty and alumni of the elite graduate schools define the dominant values of educators and set their political direction, and they have great influence through the media on public opinion. All this in the service of a succession of educational fads that change as arbitrarily as hemlines and determine what will be fashionable this season in the teaching of reading or math. The main thing produced by the educrats is an endless series of reports, usually based on research funded by the government directly or through tax-exempt foundations indirectly. As for the undergraduate schools and colleges of education, the worst of them are certification mills where the minimally qualified instruct the barely literate in a parody of learning. Prospective teachers leave these institutions no more prepared to impart knowledge or inspire learning than when they entered. How can we reconcile the high value we presumably place on schooling with the relatively low standards for entrance into most such programs? Other collegiate departments, with some justification, look on them as dumping grounds. In between these extremes, there stretches a wide range of programs, most of which have in common a set of required courses on methods of teaching and theories of learning that are deadly dull. There is almost universal agreement among classroom teachers that they are too much, too soon. What teachers find useful in their preparatory training is practice teaching and advice from experienced teachers. What they get in the methods courses means little to them until they get into the classroom. And even then, what they find useful that can be learned from lectures, readings, and classroom discussion could probably be taught in one intensive summer or a single year of evening classes. Why then the years of pedagogical training, which produce people who have a lot of information about how to teach, but have little or nothing to teach? The answer lies in the vested interests of accredited schools, colleges, and departments of education, graduation from which is tantamount to certification in most states. It lies in the tendency of legislative bodies, unions, state, district, and local school boards to prefer to remain with the status quo. It lies in the inertia which tends to perpetuate all established institutions once they have taken hold. Unfortunately, the status quo is a system that does not produce the teachers we need, the best teachers our children could have. Should we do away with it entirely? One could make an argument for doing so. But a more realistic solution, it seems to me, is to improve teacher education by minimizing methods courses and integrating them into a strong liberal arts curriculum while raising entrance requirements and standards for graduation, and at the same time introducing flexibility into the certification process. Reformers of teacher education propose both extending and reducing the time and the requirements of teacher preparation programs. Those who would extend it are the ed school establishment, led by the Holmes group of deans of graduate schools of education, who propose a 5th year of education courses after earning an academic BA, with the addition of an internship in supervised teaching. This plan has the advantage of providing for a full 4 years of substantive learning. Only after presumably having acquired mastery of some body of knowledge do prospective teachers turn their attention to ways of imparting what they know. At the opposite end of the reform spectrum are those who propose alternative routes intended to attract talented college graduates and career changers by bypassing the educational theory and methods courses and concentrating on learning by doing on the job from experienced teachers. Those who advocate the alternative approach believe that teaching is more of an art than a science, and that future teachers have more to learn about teaching from current teachers than from college professors. A combination of native intuition, common sense, and experience is thought to be more useful than a knowledge of psychological and sociological theories of learning and particular systems of teaching. And this route is thought to be the one most likely to attract teachers of the most needed subjects, mathematics, science, and foreign languages. Another advantage of alternative certification programs is that they introduce some competition into the teaching marketplace and may force existing institutions to do better than they have been doing. As long as they possess a monopoly on teaching jobs, they have no such incentive. Both of these systems of reform would shift the emphasis from learning how to teach to learning what to teach, and from what educators call pre-service preparation to in-service professional development. What is of real use to teachers in training and to their pupils in the community's schools is not the concept, it's the practice. Time in the classroom with an experienced teacher who offers tips on how to get across what you know, provided, of course, you know something. The present focus on pedagogy to the exclusion of a liberal education means that many prospective teachers will remain practically uneducated in anything but the contentless field of education itself. They will then go into the schools armed not with knowledge so much as with an arsenal of ploys for dealing with the myriad problems they will encounter at a time when teachers are asked to do more kinds of things for more kinds of children than ever before. This emphasis goes a long way toward explaining why in many public schools in America today the pupils never read a whole book. Their teachers know how to use textbooks and worksheets and give the tests that are based on them. They would be at a loss to invent an interesting lesson on some book of stories or poems, some novel or biography, lead a discussion afterward, and design a series of written questions which would require students to organize and express their understanding of the work. Why should we expect less than that of teachers? That is what teaching means. The National Research Council's findings on the abysmal level of mathematical ability among U.S. students is surely both a cause and an effect. 3 out of 4 American students leave high school woefully unprepared in both math and science, and there is no reason to suppose that all future teachers are drawn from that proportion who are even minimally scientifically and mathematically literate. The colleges of education do not require them to be, and graduation from their programs has traditionally been tantamount to accreditation for teaching. How much better it would have been, how much more enriching, educational, for prospective teachers to have read one great novel or a biography of some outstanding historical figure in the context of his or her time than to have read all the jargon they are given about classroom strategies and learning theory. What is the good of all this methodology if there is no knowledge to exercise it on? It would seem that instead of what are called the foundation courses of methods of instruction, the foundation for a teaching career ought to be the knowledge of something to teach. Cell biology, the mythology of ancient Greece, the Renaissance in Europe, the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the mathematical concepts that underlie computers. And fundamental to all such knowledge is what usually goes by the name of the basics. That no one has yet figured out a way to provide without the currently unpopular way of learning that used to be called by heart, whether it's a matter of drill in performing arithmetical operations or in memorizing facts about events occurring over time. Without starting at the beginning, there isn't much likelihood of getting very far, which may be why so many of our students, as they move along the schooling route, find themselves stranded. It also goes a long way toward explaining why no reform of teacher education programs or teacher certification processes per se will solve the real problem of why our school children learn so little and our graduates know so much less than they should. Doing that will require something far more radical, nothing less than raising requirements all along the spectrum of schooling so as to make schooling synonymous with education and learning a corollary of teaching. In the attempt to make everyone seem as equal as possible, college standards have been lowered both for admission and for graduation. And since almost anyone can get into college somewhere, no one has to work particularly hard to do so. High school graduation requirements have softened continually over the years, with the results that succeeding national assessments of educational progress have made abundantly clear. We confer high school diplomas on students who often cannot handle the simplest math operations and who consistently rate at or near the bottom of international comparisons of math performance. The problem is that our teachers don't know enough math and science to teach it to their pupils. They themselves are products of the system that requires little of its high school graduates and little more of its baccalaureates. whose education courses then train them to be social workers rather than develop the meager intellectual skills they bring with them to graduate study and beyond to the classroom. This is a state of affairs that has resulted from the primacy of the idea that achieving equality of attainment should be the goal of the public school system. Since human beings inevitably differ in capacities, interests, and motivation, in order to bring everyone to the same level, what is required will have to be within the capacities of the less capable, the indifferent, and the distracted. When almost everyone passes, almost everyone gets a degree, in spite of any strict and objective measures of achievement, what is lost is the meaning of the degree and the knowledge and skills it is supposed to attest to. That loss is felt both by individuals and by society as a whole, robbed of the potential of the exceptional individuals among us. Very little in the present public education system is designed to stimulate or encourage their potential. Even the remaining outposts designed for the education of the gifted, such as specialized high schools of science, have seen an erosion of entrance requirements, then of curriculum, and eventually of graduation standards, in the face of political demands that the student body reflect race and sex ratios in the population as a whole. The message of all the surveys, tests, and reports that show how little our students know and how little their teachers have to teach them comes home most tellingly in the studies comparing them with students in other countries whose schools demand more of them. More classroom time spent on academics, more homework, and tougher exams. Nothing has proved to inspire effort, to concentrate the mind, to paraphrase Dr. Johnson's famous epigram, like the necessity of passing a hard test. When stiff exams determine admission to the next step up the educational ladder, the youngster who wants to continue upward will work hard for long hours, whether or not his teacher appreciates his ethnicity, whether or not his classroom is nicely furnished. The youngster who doesn't care will, to be sure, fall behind. What we have to ask ourselves as a society, as parents, citizens, and educators, is what price we are willing to pay to give that youngster a degree anyway, and what good it does him or us to bolster his self-esteem at the cost of devaluing real knowledge. The problem of teacher ignorance is the problem of college graduates who don't know what they should, because they were graduated from high school without knowing what they should, having come from elementary school with poor reading skills and inadequate content knowledge. The solution begins in first grade with not passing children into second grade if they can't read and deal with simple numbers. The emphasis on providing at-risk students with self-esteem rather than holding them to meaningful standards means they aren't provided with anything else. And the notion that what they are given will hold up against the tests of the real world, or that it is any substitute for knowing something, is a patronizing one that is ultimately harmful to these very children. If we owe them anything, it is a real, not a make-believe education, and a starting chance at the kinds of skills and comprehension that will enable them to find a place in an increasingly sophisticated world of work. Clearly, then, the alternative route to teacher certification is no panacea. It will only be as effective as the individuals it attracts. It provides a potential means of improving the quality of teaching by replacing the emphasis on methodology with a focus on the intellectual disciplines to be taught. But in the end, it all comes back to the question of what it means to be an educated person in this society today. Until a college degree guarantees the possession of some real body of knowledge, and the acquisition and transmission of knowledge is understood to be the function of educating institutions, rather than the implementation of a social political agenda, we are lost and likely to remain so. In order to have the kind of teachers we need, able to enrich our children's lives by preparing them to understand and cope effectively with their increasingly complex world, we will have to change the system that prepares the teachers. By depoliticizing teacher certification, raising academic standards, and stressing knowledge rather than technique, we could make a beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now, as usual, are open for questions from the audience. Who wants to start? Excellent thing. Esther? Dr. Chismar?
I appreciate your emphasis on the importance of content in higher education. I've been troubled, however, with the dichotomy that you seem to continually draw between knowledge or content and technique. Granting that there is a certain competition for time and in the curriculum between those two things, are they really that dichotomous?
I'm not sure everybody could hear, but the question is the dichotomy between technique and content, and is it as sharp as Mrs. Kramer is suggesting?
That question deserves two answers, one in theory and one in practice. In theory, of course, these things should not be separated. In practice, they are. Now, I must say, apropos of most of my criticisms, present company excluded. I find here one of the few undergraduate education programs that does seem to integrate teaching as a profession with the liberal arts curriculum. But what I found in most schools of education was a displacement of the learning of anything of substance, of what I would call knowledge, of the humanities, of mathematics, of science, by courses in the methodology of teaching those things. But the answer, of course, is that a better system is to integrate these things. And I saw that done. I was talking this morning about the best class for prospective teachers I saw was a history class. It was a class on the Renaissance, on the year 1450, and it focused on Leonardo. And I learned more about teaching in that class than in any of the methods courses I sat in on, and I sat in on many of them because the very experienced professor of history, who had taught for many years, kept interrupting himself and his students as they discussed these matters by saying, now, here's a way you can get that across to your kids, or look, a way you can illustrate that to make it clear. And so what I would suggest is that it is possible to integrate most of what most teachers have to know about teaching with the subject matter they are preparing to teach.
Okay. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
You indicated that prospective teachers could learn a great deal from experienced teachers rather than college professors. I understand you visited several preparations. Do you have any data as to what percent of college professors are not previously experienced public school teachers?
I would probably better repeat that, because I get, what percentage of college professors are not experienced teachers? I presume essentially you mean education professors.
Right. No, I have only anecdotal reports to give you on that. I certainly did not do a statistical study. But I find that most of the tenured faculty in most of the places where I was, particularly in graduate schools of education, were people who had been out of the classroom for a long, long time. They had to have been in order to reach the level that they had. I don't think there was anyone teaching teachers who hadn't had some classroom experience, but often a long time ago, and often in the way that experience recedes from us as we get older, no longer really very available to them.
Well, you were lucky. I had two education professors that never taught in secondary school in their lives. They didn't know a thing about teaching in high school. Other questions? You found good ones. Yes.
Yes, I want to make a comment about Hispanic fathers that reacted that teaching Hispanic children to be
A busboy.
busboy. And I think that connected to the problem of bilingual education, of what really bilingual education is supposed to be. A real bilingual education, which is probably the most
want to comment?
Yes, I'd like to speak to that point. I think that originally the bilingual program was put into place and funded as a transition, isn't that what you have in mind? From non-English speaking to English speaking. And the effective classes I saw were classes in ESL, English as a Second Language, in which children were spared the trauma or humiliations of being, thrown into the water, so to speak, of total immersion in a language they do not understand or speak. I have reservations about just how traumatic that is. But in any case, by being first taught in this case in Spanish and then gradually more in English, another meaning of a bilingual education or a trilingual education might be the education that children get in Switzerland, where they learn in 3 or 4 languages of the different areas of the country. But that's not really what's meant. Bilingual education in most schools, as it exists in the States today, is a program in which there is increasing pressure for the teaching of Spanish, because obviously if that is phased out, it no longer provides jobs for, let me put it this way. In my observation, I think that bilingual education programs in this country, which are now a multi-million-dollar funded affair, have done a great deal for unemployment, but nothing for education. There is a vast bureaucracy in place administering, teaching, and so on. It has, it seems to me, little value for the children who are to be educated to function in this society, unless indeed we are prepared to say that we want there to be 2 official languages in the country and so on. But again, these all tend to be political matters, and the people that press for these programs are political people. They have a special interest agenda, and they are creating a voting bloc, and nobody's looking at the kids except their parents. And I have never found a parent who, when this situation was explained to him or her, said, this is what I want for my children. They want their children to learn English. There are parents who are indifferent, who are unaware of the situation, and of course that's where self-appointed leaders of a community arise and presume to speak for people. But my judgment on such programs, except for a few English as a Second Language programs, wasn't a happy one. Yeah.
My problem is that you're forcing a choice. Either you learn English or you learn Spanish. And what I think should be, and I have granted that it has been very politicized, but a bilingual education is not a transition education. It's an education that for a child that only understands one language, while it's in the process of acquiring the second language, could have maintenance and knowledge by using the only language that he or she understands. Now, when you reach that level, then that child can learn both languages. Why not keep developing both if at the other end of the educational system we insist that learning another language is a college requirement? But to me, it simply represents a waste of human.
Yeah, but I think your criticism is best directed at the organized bilingual establishment, and indeed there is such a thing with a huge lobby in Washington and so on. They are not interested, and the schools are not functioning as, we're not talking now about teaching Spanish, French, German, or God forbid Latin and Greek to children so that they will be humanistically enriched by the knowledge of another language. I couldn't agree with you more. That's not what we're talking about. Bilingual education is about what is described as the necessity of teaching children in the language of the country from which their parents came in order to live here. Now, unless we're going to radically change the society, and I will leave it to you to decide whether that is or is not part of the agenda of the bilingual program as of so many others, then in order to make their way effectively in this society, these children are going to have to know English. Nobody says it wouldn't enrich their lives to also know another language, but it's disingenuous to describe the movement for bilingual education in America today as being comparable to having them learn French. It's not just another subject. It is a displacement of English. A professor at UCLA, I probably should not mention names to protect the innocent, said to me that he strongly believes that Spanish should be declared with English, the second official language in this country, because there are so many people who speak that language. Well, that is a very new way of looking at things. I mean, this country has been a refuge and a haven for immigrants from all over the world. They came and, at least in my parents' generation, went into schools where they were perhaps to some degree overwhelmed by the need to learn English, but learn it they did, and I think they were the better off for it.
Grab one.
Yeah.
What is your experience as a teacher?
Oh, I've never taught. No, I should always start with that disclaimer. I have not had classroom experience. I've had children in schools, and done a lot of observing. But
Sure.
Given the present structure of the way we finance education, is a parent, I guess, a real difficulty with my daughter spending another year at university in order to get a teaching. Do you have any proposals for how we're going to fund that nationally? How are we going to restructure our financial aid? That's an extra, probably by the time she graduates, an extra $15,000 or $16,000.
well, there are two answers to that. One is, first of all, I'd just like to be able to pick up the phone and call Washington or take out my checkbook and represent a foundation or something. But one answer is to say that why should we take teaching less seriously than medicine or law or engineering or business or any of the professions that require graduate study? However, I don't happen to believe with the Holmes Group deans that that's necessarily an answer for primary school teachers, elementary school teachers. I think that learning how to teach can be integrated with a liberal arts program, and that's how we started here, that it's a matter of how you apportion time, effort, and direct the interest of a program and of the people in it.
We got a couple back here. There was a lady that was standing just to the back of you, I think, sir. That wanted a question? Yes. Didn't you have a question before? Never mind. Go ahead.
What is your opinion about the system as in some European countries where you must pass qualifying examinations in order to proceed to the next level of education?
Well, I may be run out of here. I hope all the tomatoes are off the tables. But I'm not against that. I believe in ability groupings as long as doors are kept open and as long as there's constant reappraisal of students' abilities to cope with more challenging material than they've been given up to now in more complicated settings. But I think that it doesn't take much perspicacity to look around and see that all human beings are different, and different in capacities, capabilities, motivations, interests. I have two children. They're quite different. They come from the same genetic pool, have the same background, grew up in the same home. They have very different talents, capabilities, and interests, and have gone very different directions in life. I think that we have to do a better job of deciding which kids are capable of understanding theoretical physics, which are more interested in understanding how things work on a mechanical level, and which are more interested in taking them apart and putting them back together again.
I have a question over here.
With regard to teacher education focusing heavily on teachers as social workers, where do you see trends of teacher education going in the shadow of education development?
Well, I think I have to make it clear that I don't blame teachers for this trend. I don't think teachers get up in the morning and say, boy, I want to be a social worker, I want to be a cop, I want to be a babysitter, I want to be surrogate parents to all of them. I really went into this to be a disciplinarian. They have no choice. And as a matter of fact, one of the things I was most struck by as I talked to teachers, both experienced older teachers and particularly young ones going into the field today, is that they have a pretty good idea what they're getting into. And when I ask them, well, how do you feel about this menu of things you're expected to do, their answer usually is, well, somebody's got to do it, or if we don't do it, who will? I think there is among young teachers a great degree of altruism. The question is how to harness it. What will America 2000 do? Too soon to tell. I'm an orthodox practicing skeptic. And if I've learned anything in life besides how hard it is to be a parent or a teacher, it's that social programs, no matter how well meant, mine as well as yours, have unintended results. So the main thing that I would like to see come out of the new attention being paid to education and the new emphasis on the schools is a freeing up of the way we do things, a throwing open of doors to all kinds of alternative possibilities, because out of all that, something good may come, a kind of free market in schools, rather than substituting one program for another that hasn't worked out. And I'm very hopeful because I think the team that Lamar Alexander has put together is a first-rate team, and I think that the people thinking about these things are thinking about them in, if not new ways, at least ways that are departures from the directions that we've gone in the past 20, 30 years.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.